You're listening to a Brother Asks and Building Better Builders video education series production.
Welcome to the CraftsmanOnline podcast, the only 5-star rated Masonic podcast endorsed by the Grand Lodge of New York. Any opinions, thoughts, or viewpoints shared during this program are that of the individual and do not reflect the official position of any Grand Lodge, appendant, or concordant body from which that member may hail. I'm your host, Brother Michael Arce, co-founder of CraftsmanOnline.com, and a quick reminder, you can now listen early and ad-free to our podcast with our new subscriber offer. Just click on the link in the show notes for this episode to start your free 7-day trial. This week, we are glad to have him back, our returning champion, and we actually have, for those that are watching on his YouTube channel, some visual aids. Brother John Nagy, who is the author of A Brother Asks, Volume 1, Uncommon Discourses About Hiram, along with many other writings that he does, as we have shared. Welcome back, Brother John.
It's an honor, Brother Michael. Thanks again for having me.
I love this episode. It's kind of a book report for our listeners. So we're going to get into a lot of the extensive research that you've done on the allegory of the Master Mason degree. We'll get into some of the geographic and esoteric significance of the Ruffians' flight and their actions as we do in the Masonic ritual, but also dig into your book here. And as we do with all of our podcasts, I start with the disclaimer that sometimes you can hear the smile in my voice because of the world we live in. We have to tell people, opinions, thoughts, whatever. But you handle it in a creative way with your book. Tell us about the suitable and fair warnings you provide to your reader.
I can tell you right off the bat that a lot of my books take the readers into territories that they had not considered. And as a consequence, it's a roller coaster ride for a lot of them emotionally because they come into reading the book with preconceived notions. And as a result of coming into the book with preconceived notions, as I share more and more light, that those preconceived notions get challenged. And I encourage the brothers in my fair and suitable warning to leave all preconceived notions aside, read through the entire book before they come to any conclusions, and give a fair and equitable opportunity to reconsider what they've been taught.
See, I love talking with you because you have that engineer mindset. And I've always been told like the best way to write a story is start from the end and then work your way back to the beginning so you don't forget any of the details. I would have never thought to write a book and then take a step back and say, well, hey, do I need to think about how the reader would have thought about this or what their experience was? So this isn't the first book that you've written
or the first and fair and suitable warning that I've provided in the book. It's become common staple because, well, quite honestly, I find that the reviewers of my book, stage one, I write the book because I'm trying to get clarity on things that I'm investigating. And therefore, the first run through on the book is for my purposes of gaining clarity. And the second run through is, okay, now that I have gotten it to the point where I'm satisfied with it, I want to share this information with other people. So what I do is I have a collection of brothers who critically review my book. And usually when I have this trusted cadre of brothers read through it, I have a lot of them coming back saying, holy crow, Nagy. The average Mason reading this, or shall I say the average Freemason reading this, is going to be deeply disturbed by the information that I'm sharing. And yet the information I'm sharing is freely available. All you have to do is connect the dots. So the second run through is satisfying my entourage of brothers who come to my rescue and say, you need to rewrite some of this and reword a few of these things. And finally, we craft it together so that it is ready for the brothers out in the field, so to speak, who are looking for light and are trusting that myself and my collection of trusted brothers are putting out material that has been reviewed carefully. Yet even with the careful review, I want to make sure that people who open the book are warned ahead of time that the information that they are about to review for themselves all the way through is going to disturb them, but hopefully in a positive way.
Right. No, it's just interesting to hear. And I appreciate you sharing the writing process, because I'm working in a professional setting with a client who's working on putting out a book about healthcare reimbursement. And she's basically a subject matter expert on that. And I am learning so much about that area because I have to help her with her book. And it's not really what I went to school for. In this instance, knowing you and how inquisitive your mind is and how you do your research and, you know, where your ideas come from, to hear you as a subject matter expert and how you still get feedback from a trusted circle, kind of an editorial review process. What is it like when you launch this beautiful book out into the world and you get feedback from brothers? How has that either constructive criticism or fearless feedback shaped your perspective?
It tells me I'm on the right track. The vast majority of brothers who contact me always give me a positive reassurance that what it is that I'm putting out is needed to be put out. And again, Brother Michael, I write these books to gain clarity on what I'm researching. And it's only the second and third wave of going through it that I restructure it for the general member. When I write it, I'm looking for clarity. I really am sincerely looking for light that is there, but it's hidden in plain sight. And I have to, by virtue of researching the topic thoroughly and getting literally out of what I call the inbred material that we find in the craft and going out beyond the boundaries, that the information that is just smack dab right there in front of us comes to light differently by taking a look at it from a non-Freemasonic view and then coming back into the Freemasonic view saying, okay, now I understand why the ritual writers put it in there. And a typical example, we did an interview a little while back on that shoe. I mean, look at the vast amount of information that was not provided to us as Freemasons by virtue of exploring not only the Bible story of Ruth, but the background traditions and laws of the Hebrew people in and around the Mediterranean and specifically around Jerusalem and Moab. Just so much comes to light until we start to realize, wow, the individuals who put together this ritual, they gave us a breadcrumb trail that it's up to us to follow. And the interesting thing is, we can follow the breadcrumb trail all the way up to the very thing that they wanted us to discover and find out that the very thing that we were led to discover is far more in depth than at first view.
And yeah, no, I mean, while listening to you talk, I'm thinking about our relationship, and we're on the third season of our podcast with CraftsmanOnline. And you were one of the first guests that we had that became a reoccurring. It's like, we got to get him on every month. Like, I love having, and the listeners in our audience really support having you on the podcast as well. I think what makes you so unique, and we will get into talking about the book, dear listener, don't worry, we'll get there. But you came into my life in Freemasonry relatively early because you were one of the first authors that I was able to pick up your material, read it, and understand it, because it wasn't steeped in old English or written, back in the early 1900s. And that's what I found so succinct about your information was it was just, very fact-based, and it's what I needed. And I started with you in the Building Boaz series. How long have you been writing on Freemasonry?
On Freemasonry itself, I think the first official Freemasonic book that I wrote was Building Hiram back in 2009. Of course, I had been writing it for a few years because of my lodge brothers wanting me to provide the light. And it wasn't until I had 12 chapters that they started saying, well, you need to put that into a book. And it was actually 12 lectures. And so what I did was in 2009, I started the rolling up the sleeves and researching and writing, and it finally got published in 2009. But ironically, the two books before that, Provoking Success and Emotional Awareness, EA, made easy, uh, were written while I was still going through learning about the organization. And although they were designed primarily for coaching clients, I recognized that the very things that I was writing about in these books were also Freemasonic in nature, or shall I say Masonic in nature, not Freemason.
Right.
So
Gotcha.
although I don't hold them out as Masonic books, there's definitely a Masonic author behind them.
Right, right. Well, and that's the neat thing is like knowing you, and I think our listener will agree with this as well, that when you hear an author speak and then you pick up their work and you read their writing, you can still hear that voice that comes through the words. And what I found interesting about this book, A Brother Asks, is that the format is a little bit differently. You do follow the traditional your style of writing in paragraphs, but then you also do have that almost Q&A cipher like portion of the book as well.
I went away from the Q&A. I went more toward a discourse between two learned brothers. And as a result, there was a different character that was coming across in the book. I enjoyed writing it because that back and forth banter between brothers was a nice way of presenting information. And every single conversation that went on in that book is between me and another brother. So those conversations are literally the conversations that I've had with learned brothers over the years about the Hiramic legend. It was fun conveying that through a dialogue of two learned brothers.
Yeah, no, I love the format. It was different, and it does have that conversation flow, and you lead perfectly into the theme of this podcast episode. And if you've heard previous episodes, we've spoken about the Hiramic Legend with Brother John, but a little background for the listener. At this point in the Hiramic Legend, where your book starts, we're picking up in the chapter where the Ruffians have slain Hiram and they're looking to escape to foreign countries. And it's interesting because those of us that are learned in ritual, we know the two places that they try to get to. But I love this part of your book. A brother asks, why did they choose those two places? I never thought to ask that. So historically and esoterically, why was Joppa the first choice for the Ruffians?
From a practical standpoint, if they wanted to make it out of the country, it was 40 miles literally from where they slayed to the boat docks, plus or minus maybe a half a mile. But literally, if you plot in from the Temple Mount area to Joppa, you get about 40 miles. And the interesting thing is that the word 40, not the number 40, but the word 40 in symbolic terms means trial and test. And I found that just absolutely fascinating that when I plugged in the coordinates on the Google map, there was 40 miles plus or minus a fraction. And I'm saying, well, there's an interesting number that I've run across in the past. And I knew from past research that 40 was test and trial. So here we have three ruffians who slay beauty. And then what they do is they have to travel 40 miles. They're tested. And when they finally are through with their test, where do they wind up? They wind up smack dab in front of beauty. Now, you're saying, no, John, they traveled to Joppa. Well, if you look up what Joppa means, it means beautiful. And it's like, yeah, they slay beauty because beauty wouldn't give up beauty secrets. And then they are tested, and where they wind up smack dab in front of beauty again, and they get rejected. Why? Because they didn't have wisdom's passport. So
Wow.
the entire tale takes on an entirely different feel when you replace what things are symbolically represented as, because they're characters. And, you know, Hiram is a character. The Ruffians are characters. The 40 miles is symbolic. Joppa is yet another representation of Hiram, you know, because Hiram is beauty and Joppa is beautiful. So it's like, and that they don't have King Solomon's passport. Well, you know, King Solomon is wisdom. And so what you're actually saying is Joppa rejected them because they weren't wise enough. which is
Wow. Well, you've made the comment, and I've borrowed your phrase and shared it with other brothers, that the Hiramic legend is really an allegory within an allegory. But this almost has like an inception moment where it just continues to be an allegory with more, with more. It is probably, when you investigate this, would you say one of the best written stories that is out there that is not from the Bible?
I find it utterly fascinating how beautifully rendered it is, and how fascinating the wisdom that is being conveyed by this entire allegory can be to somebody who takes the time to roll up their sleeves and investigate it.
Okay. And there's a lot of things that happen during this degree, and you, when you're witnessing it, either as a sideliner or a candidate that's going through it, there's new characters and settings and situations that come to play. And again, it's that by fire hose initiation experience where you're like, I don't understand any of this. But there's one character that sticks out, and we've joked that now in modern practices of the ritual, it's almost there in a comic relief way, just because lodges don't know how to properly attire the seafaring man, I guess is the best way. He ends up looking like the Gorton fisherman. And it's even funnier if you're in the New England area and a brother is dressed like that and does his part with the accent. It really completes it for the win. But let's talk about the seriousness of the seafaring man, his job. Why is he there? And especially, why is he there at that moment in the story?
The three ruffians were trying to exit the country as fast as they could. And the fastest way that they believed was by getting to a port, and it happened to be Joppa. And of course, we know it's not coincidence. We're telling a story, and each character in each place is characteristic of what is trying to be conveyed. As I said, Joppa is beautiful. And so they're done with their 40-mile trek, AKA their test, and they get rejected once again. And the interesting thing about the rejection is Beauty did not care how much money they had. It made no difference how much money they had, nor how strong they were. And money basically is strength. It's a resource that could be used to enable people to get their way. And the seafaring man basically said, well, I don't care for your money. It makes no difference to me how much resource you have. Without wisdom, you shall not pass. And there's a strong message there, because in order for them to have the master's word, they had to have the secrets of the master mason. And if they didn't have the secrets of a master mason, they were in no way going to be able to have the wisdom to understand what it takes to bring about beauty. And so Beauty rejected them, not only because they didn't have the prerequisite wisdom, but they were trying to bribe, pay their way to Beauty. And Beauty said, you can't pay your way to beauty. You have to have wisdom in order to get that beauty. That's a strong message to candidates if they are coached and instructed and mentored toward understanding what the tale is actually conveying and how it relates to what they're trying to do in their lives.
Yeah. Well, in the first pass, you're just seeing, okay, there's these guys that did this horrible thing. They committed murder. They killed Grandmaster Hiram Biff. Now they're trying to get out of the area. They're like any criminal. It didn't seem like they really had a plan. What if things go wrong? There was no plan B. And now every time they've tried to make their escape, they just get shut down and shut down. And the details that you're providing is that forensic analysis that really is lacking, I think, in the ritual, and the education that should follow up afterwards is really consider less of this as a flight and a flee, but why they were being told they couldn't get out of the situation that they were in.
And it reinforces exactly the reason why Hiram Abiff said to them, you can't have it until the temple is complete. You have to do the work. You must complete the temple in order for you to have the wisdom to understand the master's word. And without that wisdom, you aren't going to be able to understand what the master is conveying to you, which is what the master's word is all about. It's a conveyance of wisdom but you're not going to be able to glean that wisdom without the foundation of understanding. And they simply didn't have it. What they wanted was a participation trophy.
Right.
They wanted to be able to say, I got something because I showed up, not because I did anything special or completed any kind of task or earned it. By virtue of me showing up, I ought to be able to get it. And they tried to beat it out of Beauty, and Beauty wouldn't give up the secret because, well, Beauty knew very well that no matter what it was that Beauty provided to them, they didn't have the wisdom because they didn't complete the temple.
Right. That's another side part of this. I'm interested in future generations when you talk about the participation ribbons and trophies and the entitlement that some generations, young folks feel, is how they view that part of the story. Where my reaction, and I'm sure it was pretty much the same as yours, it's like, well, of course these guys aren't going to get it. They weren't good masons. They weren't finished. They tried to circumnavigate the deal that was, you'll get this when the temple is finished. Their work wasn't complete, so of course they don't. Where I'm interested to hear the perspective of others that would say, oh, well, they were close enough. It was almost done.
And that's that participation trophy attitude, what just literally permeates our societies, that, well, it's good enough. But what they don't realize is that if you go all the way up to the finish line, but don't cross it, is that good enough?
Right.
The finish line is there to denote that you've completed a task. And as I've conveyed before, the secrets of a master mason are not something that I can convey to you, but I can say without any hesitation that if you internalize the disciplines that are clearly indicated by the work that the first and second degree points us toward, by internalizing those disciplines and making those disciplines part of you, you have the secrets. And it wasn't until I connected the dots on that I realized that the master's word was literally hidden in plain sight. And because I had done the work, I was able to recognize what really was being offered. And the problem is that if you don't study grammar, you're not going to be able to read at the level that you need to for comprehension. So I can hand to you any book, and it may be packed full of all sorts of wisdom. But the problem is, if you've not studied and cultivated and disciplined your heart, what's happening is you're going to be reading it from a place that is going to only be able to comprehend where you're coming from. And you have to cross the finish line. And once you cross the finish line by completing the temple, what you read is going to sound utterly different. Now, I'll give you an example of this. I have had a wonderful brother tell me that he has read my Blue Book series 5 times. And I said, good God, man, why would you ever want to put yourself through reading my Blue Books 5 times? And he said, John, I don't know if you recognize that your books literally reshape the way the reader thinks. And every single time that they subject themselves to reading your books, they're remapping their brains so that when they go to reread your book the second and third and fourth time, every single time they come away with more remapping and better understanding. Is I'm through the books the 5th time and I'm going back over it the 6th time. And I said, why? It's because every time I go through it, I glean more information that I could not comprehend the first times through. And it is the remapping of my brain through what you have offered. The way that you put these books together helps clarify thinking processes. And the more I go through, the more my thinking becomes clarified. And I glean gems every single time. and I don't want to miss them. And so I'm going to subject myself to rereading the books again and again and again, because I know I'm going to be rewarded every single time I do it. And that was a mind-blowing experience to hear that, because I had never considered that my way of thinking is being conveyed through these books. And my way of thinking is a standard approach to investigation. My discipline is engineering, as you had mentioned in the beginning. And I'm an engineer twice over. And I have subjected myself to what is called applied science, which basically means I'm a scientist and I use a scientific method to investigate. And as a result of using that method, people who read my work literally are seeing the scientific method of investigating, believe it or not, mythology.
Yeah.
And what happens is they start seeing connections in the allegories that were not immediately obvious the first few times through, because the way that they were thinking wasn't the way that the light was going to be shining through. And so what I've done purposely in my writing is help to show a path on how the reader can create that for themselves. Are you familiar with the mastermind technique?
No, but what I'm envisioning is kind of the in every crime, movie or TV show, the red string. There's just not enough for you. It's like all the points and is that what you're going to describe?
The mastermind technique is as follows. I can brainstorm with you, and what you're going to do is you're going to walk away, or I'm going to walk away, depending on who's the recipient of the brainstorming, some ideas I hadn't considered. But if you take it to the next level, and I interact with you by asking a series of questions, and you internalize that way of investigation, so that even when I walk away, you've now internalized the way John goes about thinking. So
Right.
now you, as a consequence of walking away from our interaction, have now trained yourself not only to think and investigate Mike's way, but you're now employing John's way of investigating, John's techniques. So now what's happened is you've got two techniques battling themselves out in your brain. And if they work in harmony, you're now taking your thinking to the next level.
Love that. Yeah.
And that's what mastermind is all about. So what happens is, if people take the time to read my books and see the way things are put together and train themselves in a different way of investigating and thinking, they now walk away with a mastermind in their head, because now they have two entirely different ways of going about researching. They've got Coach's way and they got their own way. And if they allow that synergy to blossom and take root, they're going to take their thinking to a much higher level.
Yeah. And, the subtle warning for the reader and listener is that little voice inside your head has just been replaced by Brother John.
Interestingly enough, I have my clients say there are times when I'm doing stuff, I hear your voice come into the thinking process clearly, asking a question that I know you typically ask. And what happens is eventually that voice that gets replaced by their own. And when it does, I know that they've owned it. It has become part of them. The process has been fully integrated and is now part of them. And it's one of the greatest compliments that I could ever get, is that I presented support enough so that they can take it and run with it on their own. And that's exactly what I do with these books, is I'm trying to present ways of going about thinking about Freemasonry and the application of Masonic principles and such that it is owned by the individuals who read my materials and see these videos.
So for this episode of the Craftsman Online podcast, we have the author of this book on your screen and in your ears of A Brother Asks, Volume 1, Uncommon Discourses About Hiram. We're continuing our conversation with Brother John Nagy. Where we last left off, we had the denial of the three ruffians as they were trying to flee. They couldn't get out of Joppa, so now they turned their sights to Ethiopia. And in the book, you talk about Ethiopia and how that's a vital connection, but really not their final destination. Can you explain that reasoning?
The interesting thing about Ethiopia is they weren't seeking to go to Ethiopia. It's very clear that they had one serious plan, and that was to get out of town as fast as they can. And they didn't ask, "Are you going to Ethiopia? We need to go to Ethiopia." They said, "Where are you going?" And it was the sea captain that replies, "Ethiopia." And at that instant, all three said, "Coincidentally, so are we." And no, they were trying to get out of town. Ethiopia just happened to be the very first sea captain destination that they encountered. And therefore, there's a lot been made out of the fact that Ethiopia is mentioned, but quite honestly, it's only mentioned in a very narrow selection of rituals. Like in America, we use Ethiopia, but in other nations and other jurisdictions, Ethiopia is not even mentioned. And I'm of the opinion, based on what I have seen with a variety of rituals that I have reviewed over the years, that Ethiopia was thrown in there as an innovation to the story, a destination, but it was not originally within the story as it was put forth. And as a result, I have to ask, why was Ethiopia thrown in there? What was the importance of Ethiopia even being mentioned? And the interesting thing is that in Ethiopia is one of two locations in the world where the Bible is actually different. They have a book, the Book of Enoch, in their Bible that only appears in one other place. And don't ask me where it is, but I do know that Ethiopia is one place where the Book of Enoch is present. And as I understand it, the Book of Enoch is a recent discovery. And I think that somebody probably said, we're going to create another breadcrumb trail. We're going to put a breadcrumb trail to Ethiopia to see if somebody can see what's different about Ethiopia. And there's some really interesting things about Ethiopia. First and foremost, where we look at Ethiopia right now, it's very small, but Ethiopia back then was quite huge. And you could literally access it through the Nile. As a result of going up the Nile, you could travel to it at that time. But it's not a place right now that is as big as it was originally. So the country back in that time of Solomon was huge, and it's much smaller now. And the fact that there is a direct connection between the Queen of Sheba and Solomon is also a nice titillating breadcrumb to pursue. So you have a whole bunch of different things kind of overlapping. And if we were to answer why Ethiopia, well, quite honestly, it just happened to be where the sea captain was going, and they wanted to exit town as quick as they could. So when the sea captain said, "I'm going to Ethiopia," obviously they wanted out of town quickly. So they said, "Hey, that's where we're going. That's our destination." Right. So from a storyline, that was a coincidence. It was just an opportunity to get out of town. But from a deeper allegorical sense, Ethiopia is a much bigger country at that time. There's a connection with the Sheba queen.
Right. There's some mysteries that are sprinkled in there that you can...
And it's fun because when you start investigating that, you realize that they have a Christian base. They also have a Bible that has the Book of Enoch, which most Bibles don't contain. So that raises a flag immediately. Like, why do they have the Book of Enoch? And what's so special about the Book of Enoch? And gee, wouldn't you want to read that book too?
I just jotted that as a thing to do here on my list. So can you fill us in, like what we would find in there or what's so unique about this book?
Well, let's just say that a lot of the stories that are in the Bible are continued in the book of Enoch. And as a result, as Paul Harvey would say, and now the rest of the story, the book of Enoch has got a lot of interesting twists and a lot of interesting continuations of tales that are starting and originating in the Bible. But with the book of Enoch, they go further with these stories. And so, like I said, the people who sprinkle these little Easter eggs throughout our ritual, they knew what they were doing. And even though I believe it was an innovation, I think it was a clever innovation to sprinkle a country in there that has such a rich history, both past and present, and some of the interesting twists that you find as a result of investigating them. It's
right. Well, and I also have to thank you now, because I've got a new rabbit hole to go pursue. I'm sure our listeners are going to be like, well, let's go look into this book of Enoch and see. I'm also interested in hearing the history of it. One of the studies that I've done in the Bible is just who wrote that or who's credited with writing that, the origins, and really how the Bible is kind of out of order when it comes to the timeline, how we read it now, and where this book of Enoch would kind of fit into that, if it's the Rosetta Stone key, so to speak, of all of the stories of the Bible.
It's good stuff, brother, and well worth pursuing. But I'll tell you this, just like every book in the Bible, the book of Enoch is no different. And if you don't lay the foundation of your temple before you crack open the book, Maimonides had a very, very wise statement. He said, if you are wanting to pursue metaphysics, you have to lay down the foundation of physics first. If you do not lay down order in your heart and order in your mind, any religious pursuit that you get on will end in complete infidelity, because you do not have wisdom's passport in order to understand what you're reading. So
that is the new subtle and fair warning to our reader and listener.
When brothers start pursuing metaphysics, my first statement is, oh, have you completed your physics studies yet? And invariably, a vast majority of them say, well, why would I want to study physics? And my comment back is, because if you're going to be chasing down unicorns, you got to realize that they're not real.
That's another note I got to make. I missed those podcast episodes, the unicorns around the campfire. Got to round a couple of those up. All right, let's close out this podcast with our final question here, and we're going to finish up our book review and time with our author. The book, again, is A Brother Asks, Uncommon Discourses About Hiram. We have the first volume that we're previewing with Brother John Nagy. And after reading your book and reflecting on a lot of my study in our ritual, I came to a stunning conclusion based on the Ruffians' confession to King Solomon. And unlike most murder suspects, they kind of have a feeling like they maybe were bad fellow crafts that somehow possibly learned a lesson. Do you get that sense too in their confession of the crime, of the sin that they did?
I get the distinct impression by their confession that they had not subdued their passions and kept their desires within due bounds. They recognized it all too late. And as a consequence of them realizing it, they suffered the ultimate price. Were they bad? Well, they did bad deeds. If they had done their entered apprentice work and they had done their fellowcraft work, they would have been able to complete the temple. And they clearly did not know how to use the working tools properly. And when I look in the American rite, they use the 24-inch gauge, and obviously they were not using the 24-inch gauge as it was meant to be used. And they lacked all priorities, because that's what the 24-inch gauge is about. It's making sure that your priorities are taken care of, and their priorities were skewed. And in the American rite, the square is also used, and the square is the square of virtue. And they indicated through their actions that they had not invested virtue and created the square of virtue for themselves. And last but not least, and a lot of people don't know this, the setting maul is common throughout the Freemasonic system. And the setting maul, the modern day equivalent of the setting maul, is the dead blow hammer. Now, if you ever used a dead blow hammer in anything that you've done, it's designed so that when you hit something, the head of the hammer deforms so that it does not do damage to what it hits. It is designed to nudge and reshape without damaging. And it's very obvious that the ruffian who was using it so badly that even though the tool was designed not to harm what it was hitting, he harmed what he was hitting.
Right.
Which tells you that, once again, he had not done the entered apprentice and fellow craft work. And in doing so, it was clearly evident that he had not completed his temple by virtue of the way that he was using the working tool.
Right.
But little tease here. You didn't bring up the ruffians' names, which I gave in the book, clear indication of what the ruffians' names not only were, but what they were conveying, and also in what language they were conveying. You brought none of that up. You didn't bring anything up about, was Hiram resurrected or was Hiram raised, and what the difference is, and how you can defend whatever conclusion you come to, and a host of other things that are blatantly important in the book. You didn't bring those up.
Well, I had a nice inscription in here from the brother that was the author that wrote this book. And I thought, he's right. I'm going to hold on to this for future episodes and use. So, yeah, I think we have a lot to discuss left in this Brother Ass book here.
I'm looking forward to continuing that journey with you. And I'm also very delighted that you had mentioned, for our video viewers, you've mentioned your podcast, but I have a video channel that these podcasts are literally in video form shown on the YouTube channel. It's John S. Nagy. And for the listeners who are interested in watching the interaction between you and I'd like to mention that the YouTube channel is where you would see that.
Yeah, and you can vote on who the more handsome brother is. I already know where the needle's going. Congratulations, John. I'll also tease for our listener that our next episode will air on Monday, August 14th. And that's when John Nagy will return to talk about traveling to foreign countries.
Oh, that's a great. Yes.
Which is also a topic that is covered in our book that we talked about. If you've enjoyed this podcast episode and you'd like to hear more, you can tell Siri or Alexa to play the Craftsman Online podcast. We're available on all streaming platforms with new episodes every Monday. And don't forget, a reminder, you can listen to future episodes early and ad-free with our subscriber offer. You can get the link to start your 7-day free trial in the notes for this episode. Until next time, let peace and harmony prevail.
You've been listening to a Brother Asks and Building Better Builders video education series production.